Hello, friends and fellow gardeners. Here we are again at World's Worst. Hopefully not really worst. Learning from our mistakes and learning from each other, hopefully. So it is end of January, and we're going to talk about zones, whether or not those are important or a thing, so to speak, and set out dates, seed starting dates, things like that. So right now, we just got over a pretty lengthy freeze. First time this year that we really got into the low single digits and stuff like that for an extended period of time. So now it's pleasant, 40 degrees maybe. And as you can probably see behind me, I have a lot of work to do. I've set up one birdie's bed out of 6. So so we have some work to do there, but there is quite a bit to talk about when we are looking into when do we want to start our seeds, when do we want to plant them out, and if we're just going to direct sow. So while we're out here, let's take a look at what we mean by a killing frost. So this is my cover crop, vetch and peas and maybe some oats anyway. And it got killed off by this most recent frost because it was low temperatures for a decent amount of time. So same here when it comes to, this is where I planted my garlic, and I still had some onions that I'm trying to overwinter. And you can see all that greenery and the tops that had been growing is now died back. So for the cover crop, that's fine by me, saves me the trouble of killing it come spring. But for something that you do want to keep growing even through the winter, I haven't done this yet, but let's say cabbages or maybe a lettuce, broccoli, something in the brassica family. Lettuce isn't, but the other two are. That is more cold tolerant. That is where you want to cover it with either a row cover, some fleece, something, right? If you have built a cold frame, which goals, right? But when we talk about what a plant can and cannot survive, that is actually where the hardiness zones come in. So that's where we're going to start. We're going to go in, get on the computer, take a look at a couple of sites. We'll talk about that. But hardiness, right? How hardy is a plant? What can it survive? Well, that's what a hardiness zone is, and that is all a hardiness zone is. We're going to talk about that a little bit over at the computer.
Hello and welcome. So it's a bit of a cliche, right, to say if you have nothing interesting to talk about the weather. Well, that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. So I hope you do find it interesting. So I'm going to do a brief PowerPoint presentation, then we'll get to some websites and really talk about weather and seeds, how that relates to seed starting. Okay. So we'll talk about hardiness zones, which I know there's a little controversy around those. We'll talk about that later. First and last frost dates, how that then relates to when you want to start your seeds. So seed starting dates. Day length, that's mostly for onions, some flowers. We'll touch on that, but not really very long. And then sometimes you'll see things, instead of saying a particular date, it'll actually ask for a soil temp, as soon as the ground can be worked, as soon as the soil temperature is X or Y, right? So that's why that's important. And then climate in general, which that can help you determine what you're going to grow. Okay, just to make sure everybody understands, hopefully most of this is rudimentary for everybody, but let's just talk about it. So hardiness, we'll talk about that more again when we get to that, but that is just a plant's ability to survive the winter. Okay, that is all that means. So an annual is something that does not survive the winter. It lasts 1 year. Biennial, so onions once again. So that's something that flowers or fruits in the second year. So an onion, it'll make that bulb, store its energy in the first year, and then the second year is when it flowers. Okay. Dianthus is an example of this. Perennials come back year after year, and then That's where the hardiness zone comes in. Okay, well, something may not be perennial if you're in Saskatchewan versus in Florida, right? So that's where that's where the zones do come in and become important. So, for example, you want to check these. So, just because something at your big box store says perennial, mounting perennial or whatever, you want to check that and say, okay, well, I see that it's hardy down to 0 to -10 degrees. Do I get that cold where I am? Where I'm going to put that plant, is it going to get colder than -10? Okay, so I was listening to Gardner Scott on the Beginner's Garden podcast with Jill, and he was saying, I think he is in zone 6, speaking of that. And he said his rule of thumb is actually to shoot for one zone colder. So colder is a lower number, right? Just the lower temperature, lower number. So he actually recommends, if he's in zone 6, to shoot for things that are zone 5 because you might get colder than the normal zone 6 coldness in a particular year. So that's why that's his recommendation, and that makes sense to me. Okay, frost just means you're hitting 32 degrees, staying there overnight, right? That's frost. Hard freeze, most plants can actually survive down to 28 degrees. So that's when we talk about a hard freeze. That's a killing frost, otherwise known as. So that's at least 4 straight hours below 28 Fahrenheit. Okay, first frost, that's just in the fall when stuff starts to die off. That's your average first frost date, the average date that it gets down to 32 and stays there for a bit. Last frost, that is your hopeful last day where the last day of 32-degree weather in your area. So again, that is an average. You still want to watch the weather. Want to see if it's 5 degrees out today, I don't want to just cross my fingers and say, well, tomorrow's my last frost date, I should be good, right? So you still have to pay attention to that. So your gardening season generally last frost to first frost, but if you're using a greenhouse, if you're using a cold frame, some things survive before and after, last frost and first frost, so you can grow them in a different season. But your general growing season for your vegetable garden is going to be last frost to first frost. Again, simple terms, direct sow, stick it in the ground. Not really, if you stick your seeds straight in the ground outside. Transplant, you bring them from somewhere else, whether it's a garden center or a nursery, you grow them inside, bring them out to the outside, that's a transplant, right? Hardening off, if you are doing your own stuff indoors, and you can look this up, I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but hardening off, you need to get your plants acclimated to the outside. You can't just dump them out there. You have to slowly but surely do that over a couple of days, about a week. Set out date, we're going to talk about this when we get to the how to calculate when to start your seeds. That is when you put the plants in the ground. Okay, so there are things like cabbages and lettuce, brassicas. Lettuce isn't a brassica, but you get the idea. That you can set out before that last frost date. There are things that are warmer, that like temperatures warmer, like peppers, that you're actually going to wait a couple weeks after. So most seed starting packets will say start indoors 8 weeks before last frost. Okay, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to grow it for 8 weeks and then plant it. You might grow it for, again, if it's a pepper, you might grow it for 10 weeks. Give it a couple extra weeks before you plant it out. All right, germination time, that is just how long it takes your seeds to sprout. Germination rate, that's how many seeds sprout. So if I have something with a high germination rate, some seed packets have this on it, some do not. So if I have something with a high germination rate, well, I'm probably going to put fewer seeds in my cell to make sure that at least one of them sprouts. Whereas if something's like a lower, like 60% germination, I might put 5 or 6 seeds just to make sure it's going to sprout. Okay, or I get just to make sure I get at least one. Days to maturity, that's an entire other discussion in and of itself too, because usually for something that you direct sow, days to maturity is going to be from the day you direct sow it. For something you transplant, days to maturity is going to be um, days after you transplant it. But all sorts of things can change that, right? If you're in a warmer climate and it gets warm sooner and you have a heat loving plant, well, its days to maturity may be uh, lower if you're in a warmer temperature, warmer zone than in a colder zone. Uh, you can have microclimates in your own garden where this area gets more shade, this area gets more precipitation, whatever, so even the same plant in the same garden may have different days to maturity. So just keep that in mind. Don't get all upset well, it said I could start picking my cherry tomatoes at 55 days and there aren't any. That happens, right? There's a lot of things that can affect days to maturity. So this is what a seed packet looks like. I, again, don't think that this is new to anybody, but I just wanted to show you this. So this is a botanical interest. It's actually two different seeds. So on the left is some lettuce and on the right is a gourd. But I really like theirs because it has all sorts of information, including days to emerge. So when do I expect it to germinate and when do I expect to see it? Seed depth, most packets will have that on there. Days to maturity, look, 20 to 45 days, depends on, do I want to grow it as a microgreen? Do I want to grow it do I want to harvest it a little larger, right? So lettuce can be all over the place. Here's what I really love is the when to sow outside, and it talks about temperature, right? Temperature is at least 40 degrees, ideally 60 to 70. So if I'm going to germinate inside, okay, this one says not recommended with this one, but just for example, why I really love the botanical interests ones is they tell you your ideal germination temperature. So if my ideal germination temperature is 60 to 70, I am not going to use a heat mat because it's 60 to 70 degrees inside here where I'm at. So I don't want to use a heat mat. Again, this has all sorts of good information. Hey, like down at the special instructions, light age germination. So you can press it, it even says higher up, you can push it in. You don't have to cover it up. So, well, that's good to know. Lettuce actually germinates better when it gets a little light. I don't want to bury it, right? Soil temperatures over 80 hinder germination. Again, don't want to use a heat mat. So, but if you are using a seed packet that doesn't have all this information on it, you can easily look it up. I just wanted to show you this one as something that I thought of as being pretty useful, right? And then over there on the right, it actually shows on the front of it, also shows 140 days to maturity. And then I've put in my own writing DS plus 4, so I'm going to direct sow it at 4 weeks after my last frost date. Then finally, day length, that's not super important for the most part. Most of your vegetables do not care. If you do try to grow, you're probably pretty advanced if you've if you're growing in a greenhouse, if you've invested in a greenhouse. But just know that just because something's nice and warm in the greenhouse, if it doesn't have the right day length and you're going to have shorter days in the winter, you might not be able to grow something in that greenhouse. So something that is considered short day actually thrives in those shorter days. Okay, so usually that means less than 12 hours of daylight. Long day, more than 12 hours a day, so something considered long day. And you can see that especially when you go to buy onions, it'll say long day, day neutral, short. So day neutral, most of your vegetables are going to be day neutral. It's not going to matter. Keep in mind when we talk about day, okay, even if something gets partial shade or whatnot, that's still considered day. So actually, the research has shown that we always call it a short day and long day, but it actually means the opposite. It means so short day, actually long night is what those plants need. Long day, short night is actually what those plants need. And that's just again how mostly onions is where you're going to be worrying about it, but certain depends if you're growing flowers, like, chrysanthemums, they bloom in the fall where I'm at because that's when the days start getting shorter. So here it is, the 2023 revised last year. Everybody's all up in arms. USDA plant hardiness zone map. For the most part, this doesn't matter. Again, all that this talks about is, so I'm zone 7A. I'm going to get down to 0 to 5 degrees as my coldest night in the winter. 0 to 5 degrees is the coldest I'm going to get. That was about right this year. The coldest we got, I think, was 8. So maybe it was actually a little warmer this year. But again, keep in mind, this is an average. This is a 30-year average. Okay, so it can get colder, it can get warmer. And again, I was listening to Gardner Scott, who was actually part of the commission that did this, and he was making a really good point. You can look up here in the upper northwest, Washington, right? You can look in the Seattle area. I think we can zoom in a bit, right? So look at that. What is that? 8B, 8, maybe even into the 9s. Okay. That's Seattle, Washington. Okay. Well, we can come all the way down here into Arizona, right? Just north of Phoenix. And we're getting the same hardiness zone. Now, raise your hand if you think that the environment is the same in northwestern Arizona as it is in northwestern Washington. So I thought that was a great point that he made. So that's not mine. I want to give credit where credit's due. So I'm over here in the St. Louis area, and it's kind of interesting, right? If you look at this, it doesn't just go along the lines of latitude, right? It's north to south. And so in the St. Louis area, for some reason, zone 6 and 7 kind of make their way up into St. Louis, whereas kind of the surrounding areas are a little bit colder. So you can even take a more granular view and type in your zip. Okay. So there's me. Click to zoom. There we go. And so now I can see 7A. That's what I'm in, right? 7A is my area. But if we zoom out a little bit, just to the east, it's 6A, 6B. So what's really important is just in terms of that hardiness is all it means is what something is going to be perennial in your area. It's going to survive the winter. That is all the hardiness zone is good for. Now, it in general can be used to help determine your first and last frost dates, but that's kind of like determining, so I'm 15 miles from St. Louis City where I live, right? That doesn't mean every single time that I travel to St. Louis, it's going to take the same amount of time, right? So I can use that distance as sort of a guide that it's definitely going to take me less time to get to St. Louis than it's going to take to get to Kansas City. But there may be things that, so that's why you want to keep an eye on your weather. You're going to want to look up your average frost date where you're at, not just based on your zone. Okay, so you can kind of correlate zone to last frost date, but not necessarily. So speaking of which, and I'm going to put links to everything that we have in the show notes here. Okay, so this is from garden.org. This gives me, and again, my area, right? I put in my zip code. That's what I chose, because why would I choose your zip code? Okay. So here is how you read that chart. Okay. Obviously, the one we're really worrying about is that last 32. So there's my last frost date, last hard frost date. If I want that, there's my 28. So those are the two I really, really care about. Okay. So what this is saying is on April 28th, a day before my birthday, on April 28th, there is only a 10% chance that I'm going to hit 32 degrees. Only a 10% chance. All right. That's why I'm usually planning things on my birthday, because that's a pretty good shot to not get frost. So April 14th, this is usually April 8th or 7th through 14th is what you're going to find if you look it up for my area. But April 14th, 50-50 shot. So again, last frost date is an average, and it also means there's a 50-50 shot of still getting frost after that. So watch your weather, watch your forecast. That's what's so important there. So, and you can decide how risk averse you are. You can point, I could plant out on March 31st and say, well, there's a 90% chance it's still going to get below 32. So I'm either going to have to replant things or take countermeasures, bundle them up, put on a row cover, or whatever. But this is a really good resource. So this is a good job, does a good job of helping you find your last frost date instead of just typing in what is the last frost date for zone 7A, right? I like something that's, because this is going to be a little bit more accurate. And then in the fall, conversely, so if I'm planning to harvest something before September 24th, well, that's pretty good. I only have a 10% chance that it's going to freeze on or around September 24th. But if I wait until October 30th to harvest something that's not cold hardy, well, I'm a fool, because there's a 90% chance that it's going to hit freezing temperatures by October 30th. So that's how that works. So here's the Farmer's Almanac, talking about pretty much the same thing. You can see that I recently bought a desk, right? So that's funny how those ads work. But this is what we were talking about earlier. Light freeze, 29 to 32 degrees, kills some tender plants, very little destructive on effect on others. Moderate freeze. Okay, that's your you're generally considering that a killing frost, right? Wildly destructive. Okay, wildly destructive. Okay. And then you can get down to severe freeze at 24 and below. So that's exactly what we were talking about before. First frost, light frost, killing frost. There you have it. And then down here, again, I'm going to have a link to this. You can go, it's going to give you a general idea. So like down here, here's what's fun. I'm in Illinois, but this isn't listing my area because everything is so Chicago centric. So everything here is actually north of me by a fair amount. So I'm going to have to actually go to Missouri and choose the St. Louis area. So there I am. And so like I said here, last spring frost, this one actually lists the 7th. So I'm getting different answers between two different places I looked. One said the 7th and one said the 14th. That's okay. Again, I just need to keep track. My mother always said that her grandmother, who was a great gardener, always said rule of thumb was Mother's Day. Well, this year, that's May 12th. Again, I tend to plant on my birthday at the latest, because the first year I did plant on May 12th and it was too late. I mean, it wasn't too late, right? But it was later than I should have started. I've also planted on April 14th or so, and then like 2 days later gotten a freeze. I should have watched my forecast. I didn't, so I had to go out and put, I think I put linens over everything. So, but yeah, so there's a couple of ways to find your last frost date. Most seed starting catalogs, most suppliers will have some sort of page like this. Now this one I like from Johnny's because it's also interactive. You can type in a date. Most of them are just static and say plant out 2 weeks before, start your seeds 8 weeks before, stuff like this. This one's pretty neat, right? You can actually type in So what did we say mine was? We'll go with April 7th. 04/07/20. Come on, learn how to type. So there we go. Enter. So this actually gives me some start dates. Like we talked about cabbage, 4 to 6 weeks, but notice this is weeks before setting out date. So you got to pay attention to these charts. This one is giving me weeks before setting out date. So I'm going to start my cabbages 4 to 6 weeks before I set them outside. So I actually just started my cabbages. So I'm actually a little early. Today's the 24th, and this says on the 28th. Okay, no big deal. But I'm going to set them out 4 weeks before that frost-free date, right? So anyway, I hope that gives you an idea. Most of them are actually, instead of giving you a setting out date, they're going to say when to start before your frost date, your last frost date. Okay, that one's pretty cool. It doesn't have everything on it, but you know, onions, right? I could have started my onions New Year's Eve, right? But I think this is a pretty handy chart, so I'm going to have a link to that. Another place I've been getting seeds for quite some time, high mowing. Very similar chart. This one isn't interactive, but that's fine. You can do the math. This one even gives you spacing and planting depth. It gives you more information. So this one is actually start plant transplants before setting out as well. So I may have misspoken when I said that most of them will actually say before frost date. The seed packets generally say before last frost date. So be aware of that. You might have a package of broccoli that says start start 6 to 8 weeks before last frost, but then it says set out 4 to 6 weeks. So just be aware of that you want to make sure that you're looking at, hey, am I starting my seeds before the setting out date or before the last frost, which is sometimes the same date. Anyway, just be aware of that. All right. So we talked about how onions are kind of their own thing. This is the Dixondale Farms. I had real good luck with their onions last year, but this is their map of, now there are neutral day onions that you can grow anywhere, but long day. So you can see I'm in the intermediate day. I'm closer to long day than I am to short day. So I might be able to get away growing some of the long day ones. But here's why, with the onions specifically, it tells you, that you can plant short day onions when you in a northern state. Northern states are going to have longer, right? Because think about it, the above the Arctic Circle, it's just day during winter. It's there is no night, so that's the longest day you can have, right? So the further north you go, the closer you get to that 100% 24-hour daylight. So that's how I think about it. Okay, north is longer days, south is shorter days. So like here, short day onions mature in 75 days when planted in northern states in late spring, but will not get very large. So onions specifically, you really want to pay attention to this, right? And again, I'll put a link for that. So Greencast is where I go for my soil temperature. I haven't 100% figured out how to use this site, I'll be honest, but every now and again you'll see something that instead of saying before last frost, etc., it'll say when the soil is reliably X temperature. So again, I have typed in my area. I've done a search for that, and then I can go down here, and I'm just going to do previous year. So here's what's nice. It shows me last year, but it also shows 5-year average and 10-year average. So really the 10-year average is really nice if I'm trying to figure out, okay, when is something going to be 50 degrees? That's a common one, 50, 55, maybe 60, okay? Well, I look here, once again, my birthday, April 29th, looks like 5-year average 60, so 62, right? So this is, again, soil temperatures, not outside temperature. So there you go. If I'm saying, okay, what's a good day to say soil temperatures are probably going to be about 60? Well, there you go, end of April, April 29th. Okay, if I'm looking for something a little warmer, okay, well, we're going to keep moving up, right? So I want closer to 70. Well, I might have to shoot for more like the end of May. Okay. So this is there might be better tools out there. If you find one, let me know. But that's just that's what I use to determine my average soil temperature for any given day. So every now and again, something will give a plant out date as soon as the temperatures are consistently uh, in the 50s overnight. Okay, so this is the Weather Channel. Okay, so unfortunately, it doesn't break it down to day by day, but I can do April low and see, okay, well, that's in the 40s, right? So if I'm shooting for in the 50s, I'm going to have to move into May. Oops, that's high. My May low, okay, there we are in the 50s. So that may be somewhere end of April, beginning of May, where it's going to uh, be in the 50s consistently overnight. Now, there are a couple of other places we can look. Climate.gov, and this site to me is a little bit difficult to use because a lot of stuff is like data sets and all sorts of stuff that we're not going to worry about using. But it says, okay, well, how do I use this site? Start by going to the NOAA site. Okay, so National Centers for Environmental Information. And then this is really, here's what was interesting, and the only reason I brought this out is so I can do kind of the same thing, minimum temperature. Okay, so this is a little more intricate than the Weather Channel one, but what I found was really interesting about it was that it basically gave me the same information because here we go, April 41.3, so it's in the 40s. So my average April temperature is in the 40s in my area, 41.3, 41.3, 43.8. And if I go to May, but it never hurts to look um, in more than one place, right? So May temperature, average lowest temperature overnight, 53. 53, so again, that's kind of 40s and 50s is what we saw on the Weather Channel. Same thing here at the more sciency government site. So whatever. So this site, what I like about it is it actually does give me breakdowns by day. So again, I put in my zip code, submitted my lookup, and so I've got by month again. So April, low temp in the 40s, May, low temp in the 50s, but then I can click on each month and I find out low temp, gradually rises as we get. So we are almost there at the end of April, right? Here's my low temp, almost there at the end of April. I got to 49. So it does turn out that if I want to have my temperatures reliably in the 50s, low temp, my zip code, May, there we go, May 2nd. So it looks like that first week of May is when I'm going to plant something out, if it's telling me to plant it out when temperatures are reliably in the 50s overnight.
But wait, there's more. I know that was a lot of information that we already took in. There is one last thing, and that's talking about climate. I'm not talking about climate change or anything like that. But so there is a difference between weather and climate. Weather is it's kind of foggy and rainy the last couple of days. So that's what the weather has been like in my area here lately. Climate is more all encompassing. So we talked about Seattle and Phoenix being actually kind of in the same zone, at least in some of the surrounding areas. Well, does anybody think that the Seattle climate, which is generally known for being rainy and overcast, is the same climate as you're going to have down near Phoenix, where it's known for being dry and hot, right? So I don't think so. And somewhat correlated to that climate is something called a biome. So that is what grows there, what lives there naturally. So we're talking about mostly plants, right? Animals are part of the biome as well. But yeah, you probably don't want to grow the same things in Phoenix that you want to grow in Seattle. So just because we have figured out our hardiness zone, we have figured out our last frost date and things like that, you still have to figure out what works for you and what works for your area. I've had a heck of a time growing potatoes. Well, think about it. Where are potatoes known to be grown? Idaho, right? Places like Maine. That's a little colder than I am. Potatoes, actually, believe it or not, are more of a cool season crop. I found out just this year they stop growing. I mean, the top will keep growing, the plant will keep growing, but the potato itself, the tuber, stops growing once it hits about 85 degrees. Well, heck, it can get up to 100 here. So I found out, hey, potatoes may not work. I'm going to try shade cloth because I really, really want to get potato. It's been the white whale for me is potatoes, is to get those to really, really be good this year. So, but that's the last thing you need to do is figure out what works in your area. Okay. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and learn from your mistakes. Do your best. Have a fantastic day.